There's a moment, and I think anyone who's ever stood close enough to something enormous, something that makes your chest tighten and your legs forget what legs are for, there's a moment right before everything changes where the world goes very, very quiet. I felt that kind of quiet exactly once in my life. And it happened on the day a human being walked into fire. Not metaphorical fire, not the kind poets write about when they're trying to sound deep at 3 in the morning. Actual fire. The kind that has weight. The kind that presses against your skin from 20 feet away and makes you feel like your eyebrows are considering leaving your face permanently. I was there, I saw it happen. And I watched an empress of the known galaxy, a being who had ruled over 47 star systems, who had negotiated the Velthar Accords that ended 300 years of interstellar war, who had never in her documented 700 years of life shown a single public display of emotion. I watched her break down and weep like a child who had just seen something too big for the universe to contain. I've been trying to write this down for 6 months. Every time I get close to the beginning, my hands do this thing where they just stop. Not because I don't remember. I remember everything. Every sound, every smell, every strange shimmer of the heat. I stop because I'm worried I'll get it wrong, that I'll describe it in a way that makes it sound smaller than it was. But here's the truth. Nothing I write is going to be as large as what actually happened. So I'm going to stop trying to protect it and just tell you what I saw. My name is Deven Osai Mensa. I was 29 years old on the day this happened. I was working as a third-tier diplomatic logistics coordinator for the Galactic Interspecies Summit, which is a very impressive-sounding job title that mostly meant I made sure the refreshment stations were stocked with the correct atmospheric supplements for 17 different species, and that the translation earpieces didn't feed the wrong frequency to the more Juvian delegates. Because the last time that happened, someone filed a formal declaration of cosmic offense, and it took 4 months to resolve. I was not important. I want to be clear about that. I was the kind of person who existed in the background of large events, the person you see in the corner of photographs who is clearly not sure which camera to look at. But I was there, in the right place at exactly the wrong and right time. The summit was being held on Veyrath Station, a massive orbital platform suspended in the gravitational median between 3 star systems, which is a feat of engineering that the Seldran architects had spent 400 years perfecting, and which they will absolutely tell you about if you give them even half an opening. The station was roughly the size of a small moon, built in concentric rings, each ring designated for a different function. Diplomatic halls, cultural exchange centers, trade floors, residential quarters for the visiting delegations. I had been stationed, no pun intended, in Ring 4, which handled the physical logistics of the summit. Supply chains, maintenance, the unglamorous infrastructure that kept everything running. We saw the important people in the distance. Occasionally they walked past us in the corridors and we stepped aside and they didn't look at us, and that was fine. That was the nature of the thing. The summit had been going on for 11 days. It was supposed to run for 14. The primary agenda was the ratification of the New Frontier Compact, a document that would, in theory, establish a framework for the peaceful settlement of the Outer Reach territories, the vast unmapped regions beyond the current edge of charted space. 43 species had representatives present. Earth's delegation was 11 people. 11 out of 43 species, most of whom had fleets that could have turned our solar system into decorative dust if they felt like it. We weren't there because we were powerful. Earth had been part of the galactic community for exactly 31 years. We were new, we were small. We were, in the polite diplomatic phrasing that various alien officials used when they didn't realize the translation earpieces were still active, charmingly primitive but surprisingly durable. I had heard that phrase approximately 7 times in 11 days. I was getting used to it. The Empress of the Valdris sovereignty had arrived on day 3 of the summit. Her name was Thessaly Vorkalindra, and she was, I want to be precise here, not what humans picture when we imagine an alien empress. There's a tendency, I think, a kind of cultural gravity that pulls us towards certain shapes when we hear words like empress and alien. We expect something dramatic. Something with too many eyes or not enough limbs or a silhouette that breaks our comfortable geometric expectations. Empress Thessaly Vorkalindra looked, if you squinted slightly and adjusted for a few key differences, like a tall woman in her late 50s. She was what the xenobiologists would classify as Veltharan, one of the older species, one of the ones that had been traveling between stars while Earth was still figuring out agriculture. Her skin had a faint blue-silver undertone, like the color of sky right before a storm, and her eyes were the particular shade of deep amber that I would later learn was unique to the royal bloodline of the Valdres, something to do with a genetic trait that developed over centuries of exposure to the twin sons of the Valdres home system. She was 712 years old. She moved like someone who had long ago made peace with the fact that time was not going to rush her. Her delegation was substantial. 32 official attendants, 12 personal guards, the Valdres Imperial Guard, who wore that characteristic gunmetal armor with the engraved patterns along the pauldrons, and an inner circle of 5 advisors who never seemed to sleep. The guards were not human. The Valdres were not human. But there was something about the way the Imperial Guards stood, the specific angle of their spines, the way they positioned their bodies between the Empress and any open space, that felt familiar in a way I couldn't immediately explain. They were protecting someone. The body knows that shape, I think, regardless of what species is doing the protecting. I want to tell you about the explosion first, and then I'll back up and tell you how we got there, because I think you need to understand the scale of what happened before I explain the specific geography of the disaster. Day 12 of the summit. Ring 3, the Cultural Exchange Ring. This was where the various species had set up physical installations showcasing their histories, their technologies, their art. It was, in theory, a space of peaceful exhibition. In practice, it was also where you put things that were impressive-looking but politically sensitive, artifacts that made good photographs and good statements. Things that said we are powerful and also cultured, please note both simultaneously. The Valdres installation was magnificent. They had brought with them a working model of the Kailindra perpetual engine, the first faster-than-light drive ever built, now considered essentially a historical artifact since modern drives had made it obsolete, but still deeply significant in the way that first things are always significant. It sat at the center of the Valdres exhibition space like a crown, 3 meters tall, all precision-cut crystal lattice and contained magnetic fields, and when it was running, which it was, on a display cycle, it produced this low harmonic hum that you could feel in your back teeth. Around the Kailindra engine, the Valdres had arranged a series of interactive displays. History, culture, science, very impressive, very carefully curated. What was not in the official display manifest, because it had arrived as a late edition that had been waved through on the Empress's personal authorization, was the Vorkalindra flame. The Vorkalindra flame was a Valdres religious and cultural artifact. I had to look this up later, because at the time I had no idea what I was looking at. It was essentially, and I'm simplifying enormously here, a sustained plasma containment field that had been burning continuously for over 2,000 years. The flame itself was a deep, shifting blue-gold, the colors changing as the plasma composition shifted through its cycle, and it was housed in a containment ring that projected a field approximately 3 meters in diameter. The heat it produced was substantial. In the Valdres home system, this flame, the original, not this, stood at the heart of the imperial palace, and its continuous burning was considered a symbol of the dynasty's continuity. If the flame went out, it was, in Valdres cultural understanding, a catastrophic omen. This was a replica, a traveling version maintained by a dedicated keeper, a Valdres elder called a Vorattendant, using a portable containment system that had been specifically engineered for transport. I did not know any of this on day 12. I knew there was a very large and very hot blue fire in the Valdres section of the Cultural Exchange Ring, and that you were supposed to stay behind the decorative barrier, and that it was very, very bright. The disaster started, as many disasters do, with something that seemed minor. The portable containment system for the Vorkalindra flame was approximately 90 years old. It had been maintained meticulously, serviced regularly, and had transported the traveling flame on over 200 diplomatic and cultural missions without incident. But 90 years is 90 years, and containment systems are mechanical things, subject to mechanical failure, and the specific failure point, the tertiary stabilizer coupling on the eastern field generator, had developed a hairline fracture during the journey to Verath Station that the pre-mission diagnostic had not caught because the fracture was in a location that the diagnostic sensor array was not calibrated to reach. I know all of this because I read the post-incident report, 412 pages, twice. At 14:37 station time on day 12, the tertiary stabilizer coupling on the eastern field generator of the Vorkalindra Flames containment system failed completely. What that meant, practically, was that the contained plasma field that had been keeping the flame in its designated 3-meter space suddenly had one of its 4 anchor points ripped away. The remaining 3 generators, operating at normal capacity, couldn't compensate for the sudden asymmetry. The field began to destabilize, not catastrophically, not immediately, but in the way that structural failures happen, first slowly and then all at once. In the first 4 seconds, the only sign that anything was wrong was a change in the flame's color, from blue gold to a brighter, harder white gold, and a rise in the audible harmonic from the containment ring. The Vorattendant, an elder Valdris woman whose name I later learned was Sira Vorlethais, noticed immediately. She was standing at her monitoring station 6 meters from the flame, and she saw the field destabilization on her readout panel before most of the people in the exhibition hall had any idea anything was happening. She did 3 things in very rapid succession. She activated the emergency alert on the containment system, which triggered a localized alarm in the Valdris exhibition space. She attempted to engage the emergency stabilizer protocol, which was designed to reroute power from the active display functions to shore up the failing field. And she sent an emergency signal to the Valdris Guard, contingent posted at the hall entrance. The emergency stabilizer protocol failed. The fracture in the tertiary coupling was too severe. Rerouting power to that generator only accelerated the failure. The field was collapsing. I was in Ring 3 because I was supposed to be checking on the atmospheric supplement station near the Seldrin exhibition. The Seldrin delegates required a slightly elevated nitrogen mixture in their immediate breathing environment, and the station in their section had been running low since morning. I had my supply trolley, I had my checklist. I was minding my own business in the thoroughly unremarkable way that had characterized my entire career. I heard the alarm. It was a Valdris frequency, a pattern of tones I didn't recognize because why would I, and for a moment I just stood there trying to figure out what it was. Then I heard Sira Vorlethais. I had met her exactly once, briefly, when her equipment manifest had come through my logistics system, and I'd had to confirm the containment system's power requirements with the station's engineering team. She was a quiet person, measured, the kind of person who seemed to carry a great deal of ancient calm with them. She was not calm now. She was speaking in Valdris rapidly, and I didn't have my translation earpiece on because I was doing supply runs, not diplomatic work, and I caught maybe 3 words, but I didn't need the words. I needed the tone. I moved toward the sound. The Valdris exhibition hall was about 40 meters from where I'd been standing. By the time I got to the entrance, maybe 20 seconds I was moving fast, the alarm tone had changed. Higher, more urgent. I pushed through the entrance. The first thing I registered was the heat. It hit me like walking into a wall, not immediately dangerous heat, but enough to make my skin prickle and my eyes water. The flame had grown. It was no longer contained in its 3-meter field. It was spreading laterally, the plasma pushing outward as the containment field's remaining anchor points struggled and failed in sequence. And as it expanded, it was consuming the exhibition materials around it. The decorative panels, the display cases, the beautiful carved wooden archway that the Valdris had brought specifically to frame the entrance to their section. The wooden archway, there was a person under it. I need to stop here for a second and tell you something that I've thought about many, many times since. There's a thing that happens in crisis situations where time does something strange. I've talked to other people who have been in them, fires, accidents, sudden moments of chaos, and almost universally they describe the same thing. Time doesn't exactly slow down. It's more like your perception becomes very, very sharp. You notice things with an almost uncomfortable clarity, the specific color of the light, the exact sound that something makes as it falls, the texture of the floor under your feet. I notice this. I've thought about it a lot, because what I'm about to describe happened in approximately 4 minutes. 4 minutes is not a long time, but I can describe it to you in enormous detail because my brain recorded every single frame of it with a precision that felt, even at the time, like something outside of ordinary experience. Okay, back to the person under the archway. Her name was Myra Vorkessel, She was 18 years old. She was a junior member of the Valdris delegation, an apprentice to one of the cultural advisors in her first interstellar assignment, brought along on this mission as an educational experience, the way that young people sometimes get taken to large events by mentors who want them to see the world. She was 18 years old, and she had been standing near the flame installation because it was her assigned responsibility to answer questions from visitors about the Vorkalindra mythology. She was doing her job. She was standing exactly where she was supposed to be standing. When the flame began to expand, she had frozen. I understand this. It's a very human, or in this case, very Valdris response. The brain encounters something outside its prepared scenarios, and it takes a moment. A beat, a pause that lasts just long enough for the situation to become worse. The archway had caught from the spreading plasma. It was made of Valdris redwood, which I later learned was not actually a wood but a crystalline organic material from the Valdris home system that was prized for its beauty and its hardness, and its catastrophically high flammability when exposed to plasma temperatures. Nobody had thought to check this. This was in the post-incident report too. Page 47. The archway was burning fast. Pieces of it were falling. And Myra Vorkessel was on the wrong side of it, between the archway and the flame. And she was looking at the fire coming toward her, and she was standing still in the way that living things sometimes stand still when the situation exceeds their capacity to respond. The Valdris guards at the entrance had responded to Sira Vorlethi's alert, but they were posting at the exterior entrance, which was the main security position. Getting from there to the interior of the exhibition space meant going through the crowd of visitors that had begun to back away from the spreading flame, moving against human and alien traffic, and the archway, the direct interior path, was already burning. There were people in that hall, maybe 60, 70 visitors across the full space. They were moving back, moving toward the exits, doing what people do. A few were recording, which I understand even though I find something sad about it. The alarm was audible throughout Ring 3 now. The station's own emergency system had picked up the fire suppression trigger and was beginning to engage. But the suppression system for Ring 3 was designed for conventional fires, not for a plasma containment failure, and the station's AI was running through its protocols trying to determine the correct response matrix, which meant a delay. Delays that measured in seconds, but seconds that mattered. I saw all of this in that sharpened, terrible clarity. I saw Myra Vorkessel. I saw the burning archway. I saw the gap in the fire, not large, maybe a meter wide, maybe a little more, at the base of the archway where the lowest section hadn't fully caught yet. And I did something that I did not consciously decide to do. I want to be honest about this part. I have been asked in the 6 months since, by journalists and researchers and curious people, and people who clearly wanted me to say something profound, whether I was scared. Yes, of course I was scared. I was terrified. There is a specific, very unambiguous fear that comes with walking toward fire, and it is not subtle, and my body was fully experiencing it. I have also been asked whether I thought about it, whether there was a calculation, whether I weighed the risk and determined it was worth taking. And the honest answer is no. There was no calculation. There was not enough time for a calculation, and I'm not sure I would have done one anyway. I saw a person who was trapped. I saw a way through, and my body moved. That's the closest I can get to an accurate description. My body made a decision, and my brain's job in that moment was to keep up. I had a fire-resistant supply trolley cover. I don't know why this occurred to me. It was one of those absurd, practical details that your brain throws at you in a crisis. The thing that's been in the background of your awareness for so long that you don't notice it until suddenly it's relevant. The trolley covers were rated for extreme temperature variance because some of the atmospheric supplements had to be kept at very specific temperatures, and the covers served as both insulation and minor protection against heat. They were not fireproof. They were fire-resistant. There is a difference. I wrapped it around my shoulders and forearms, and I went through the gap. The heat was, I don't have a word for it, I've tried. Overwhelming is too vague. Intense is an understatement on the level of calling the ocean damp. There was a moment, maybe half a second, where I was inside the burning archway in the gap at the base, and the fire was above me and on both sides of me, and the light was so bright that I was seeing it through closed eyelids, and the sound of it was a roaring, living thing. And then I was through. I had maybe a bruised forearm and singed hair on my right side. The trolley cover had done its job, partially. My jacket was not doing well. Myra Vorkessel was staring at me. I had never seen a Valdris expression of shock before. In the previous 11 days, I had mostly seen Valdris expressions of careful diplomatic neutrality and the specific expression that senior diplomats use when they are about to say something pleasant that they do not mean. But shock, apparently, is a fairly universal expression. Wide eyes, slightly open mouth, a kind of full-body stillness. I said, and I am including this because I think it's important that you understand I was not operating at peak eloquence. I said, "We have to go, right now. Can you move?" She nodded fast, good. I grabbed her hand and we moved. The flame was spreading toward us from the left. The burning archway was behind us and to the right. Ahead of us, toward the back of the exhibition space, was the secondary exit, a maintenance corridor door that I knew was there because I had spent 11 days memorizing the logistics infrastructure of Ring 3. Plasma fire does not behave exactly like conventional fire. It spreads with a kind of lateral speed that normal fire doesn't have. It doesn't creep along surfaces, it jumps, it reaches. It moves with the remnants of the collapsing field guiding it in ways that are not always predictable. I did not know this at the time. I was operating on the assumption that fire goes up and spreads outward and you move away from it, which is the general principle, even if the specifics were different. We crossed maybe 20 meters of exhibition space floor. It was not a straight line. We went around a display case that was already catching. We ducked under a section of ceiling where the plasma had reached the overhead lighting strip and caused it to spark and shed hot fragments. Myra said something in Valdris, I don't know what, and I said, "I know, keep moving," which was not responsive to whatever she'd actually said, but seemed to work as general encouragement. The maintenance corridor door was emergency rated. It opened from the inside without a code. I hit the release bar and we went through. The door closed behind us. The corridor was dim and cool, and the sound of the flame was suddenly muffled behind 2 centimeters of fire-rated station wall. We both stood there for a second. Then Myra Vorkessel sat down on the floor, which I thought was a very reasonable response to the situation, and I sat down next to her, because my legs had finally gotten the memo that we were no longer running, and they were of the opinion that sitting was very much called for. The station's emergency systems engaged fully approximately 90 seconds after we reached the corridor. The plasma suppression protocol, which the station AI had finally determined was the correct response, involved flooding the exhibition space with a neutralizing agent that bonded with the plasma particles and collapsed the remaining containment field in a controlled manner, essentially smothering the expanded flame. It worked. It took 11 minutes. The Vorkalindra flame was extinguished. The post-incident report would note that the flame, having burned continuously for over 2,000 years, was now out. The neutralizing agent had destroyed the plasma entirely. A new flame would need to be lit from the secondary source, kept in the Imperial Palace on Valdris Prime. For the Valdris delegation, this was significant in ways I couldn't fully understand at the time. For Myra Vorkessel, who was sitting on a maintenance corridor floor and had stopped shaking by the time the emergency response team arrived, it was possibly the less immediate concern. The medical team that came through the corridor door 4 minutes after us was a mixed team, Station Medical, alongside 2 members of the Valdris delegation's own medical staff, who had been alerted when the emergency call went out. They were professional and fast, and they got Myra onto a portable examination unit immediately. One of the Valdris medics turned to me while his colleague was scanning Myra, and he looked at my arm and my jacket, and he said, in very precise but accented standard, "You need treatment." I told him I was fine. He looked at me for a long moment with an expression that very clearly communicated that he had strong opinions about this assessment. And then the corridor behind him filled with the rest of the emergency response team, and there was no more time for the conversation. Myra was stable. Minor plasma exposure on her right side. She had been close enough to the expanding flame that even before the archway fully caught, the heat radiation had been significant. Not dangerous, not permanent, but real. The Valdris medic told me this in the corridor while his colleague continued the examination. He told me, and then he looked at me, and there was something in his expression that I didn't know how to read, something that seemed like it was more than just medical information. He said she would not have gotten out without intervention, The secondary exit, she did not know it was there. I nodded. I didn't know what to say to that. You went through the fire, he said. It wasn't exactly a question. There was a gap, I said, at the bottom. He was quiet for a moment, then he said, yes, and then he went back to his work. Here is where I need to tell you about the Empress. Thessaly Vorkalindra had been in the main diplomatic hall, Ring 2, the formal conference chambers, when the emergency alert went out across Veyrath Station. Her Imperial guards, acting on protocol, had immediately moved to secure her and move her to the designated emergency shelter within the Valdris delegation quarters. She had refused to go. This was, by all accounts, extremely out of character. The Empress was not, by reputation, reckless. She was 712 years old, and she had gotten that way by being, among other things, sensible about personal safety. But Myra Vorkessel was not just any member of the Valdris delegation. Myra was the granddaughter of Empress Thessaly's oldest friend, a friendship that had lasted over 400 years, across the political changes and interstellar crises and personal losses that made up a life of that duration. The friend had died 6 years before. Myra was the last piece of that connection that the Empress had. I did not know any of this when it was happening. I learned it later. What I saw when the response team had secured the corridor and the emergency was being managed was the Empress of the Valdris sovereignty being held at the outer entrance to the maintenance corridor by her own Imperial guards, who were physically, carefully, respectfully, but physically, preventing her from entering an unsecured area while the suppression operation was ongoing. She was not fighting them. She was standing absolutely still, and she was watching the corridor entrance, and her face, her very controlled, 700-year-old diplomat's face, had a look on it that I recognized even across the species divide, even without any experience of Valdris expression, because it is a look that doesn't require translation. She was terrified. They brought Myra out first. That was protocol. The patient, the person requiring medical attention, moved first. The response team came through the corridor door, Myra on the examination unit, and there was a moment that I witnessed from approximately 5 meters away as I was being directed toward the medical station at the corridor end. The Empress saw Myra. I watched it happen. That specific physical moment of recognition, the way the Empress's entire body shifted, the tension that left her shoulders and was immediately replaced by something else, something that was a different kind of tension entirely, the kind that comes after the fear, when the crisis is over and your body hasn't gotten the message yet. She said Myra's name. In Valdris, I didn't need a translation. The guards led her forward. She moved to the examination unit, and she took Myra's hand, the one that wasn't being monitored, and she said something quietly in Valdris, and Myra responded, and the Empress closed her eyes for a moment and breathed. Then Myra said something else, and she glanced, briefly, quickly, the way you glance at something when you're indicating it, in my direction. The Empress followed her glance. She looked at me. I want to try to describe this accurately because I think it matters. I was a mess. My jacket was ruined. My right sleeve had not survived the experience intact. My face was hot and my eyes were watering from the residual smoke in the corridor, and I was sitting on a supply crate that someone had pointed me toward while the medical team figured out who was dealing with me. I was not, by any measure, presenting an impressive picture. The Empress of the Valdris sovereignty looked at me. Her guards were still flanking her. Her advisors were somewhere behind her. The entire emergency response operation was ongoing around us, and she was looking at me. I didn't know what to do. I think I made some kind of gesture, a small one, the universal gesture of I don't know what the appropriate protocol is for this situation. She started walking toward me. Her guards moved with her, and then she said something, a single word, in Valdris, and they stopped. She walked the remaining distance alone. She was tall. I had registered this from a distance in the previous 11 days, but standing in front of her in a maintenance corridor with no ceremony and no diplomatic context, the height was more present. She stood very straight. 700 years, and she stood very straight. She looked at me for a moment without speaking, and then she said in standard, her standard was formal, slightly accented, precise, "You went through the fire." "There was a gap at the bottom," I said. which was what I had said to the medic, and I was aware as I said it again that it was not a very good answer, but it was the true one. She looked at me. Her amber eyes, that deep, specific amber that was unique to the Valdris royal bloodline, were looking at me with an expression I couldn't read. And then she said quietly, "The gap was not large." "No," I agreed, "it wasn't." She was quiet for another moment. Around us, the emergency operation continued. People moved, spoke, worked. The Empress and I stood in a small pocket of stillness in the middle of it. "You did not hesitate," she said. It sounded less like a question than like someone reading from a report, getting the facts right. "I didn't have time to," I said. She looked at me, and I saw something move across her face, not a dramatic thing, not something that would have been visible from more than a few feet away. A shift in the light behind her eyes, something that seemed to go deep. "My granddaughter's name," she said very quietly. "The child of my oldest friend. I have known her since she was born." I didn't say anything. I wasn't sure what to say. "She is safe," the Empress said, "because of you." "She's safe," I agreed. "That's what matters." The Empress Thessaly Vorkalindra, 712 years old, ruler of 47 star systems, 7 centuries of public composure, stood in that maintenance corridor, and she looked at this human being sitting on a supply crate with a ruined jacket, and her face did something. It broke. Not dramatically, not theatrically. The way a very old and very well-maintained wall develops a crack slowly, and then all the way through. Her face changed, and her breathing changed, and her amber eyes filled, and she wept. Right there, quietly, without putting her hands over her face or turning away. She stood there, and she wept in the open, the way people weep when they have stopped caring about being seen weeping, because the thing they feel is simply too large to be contained anymore. Her guards were watching from 5 meters away, and I could see on their faces, on those trained, disciplined Valdris Imperial Guard faces, an expression of complete stillness that was somehow louder than any sound, like they were witnessing something they had never expected to witness, something outside the categories of things that were supposed to happen. I didn't know what to do. I was sitting on a supply crate, and an alien Empress was crying in front of me, and my arm hurt, and my jacket was ruined, and none of the 11 days of pre-summit diplomatic logistics training had covered this. I did what felt right. I stood up. And I said, because it was true, "She's okay. She's right there. She's going to be okay." The Empress breathed. She nodded. She pressed her lips together and she collected herself, the way you watch someone collect themselves deliberately, piece by piece, and then she looked at me again. "You are one of the Earth delegation," she said. "I'm logistics," I said. "I'm not really part of the delegation. I was just in the area." She was quiet. She seemed to be considering something. "What is your name?" she said. I told her. She repeated it, my full name, both parts in her accented standard, getting it right. "Diven Osimensa," she said. "I will not forget this name." And then she turned and walked back to Myra, and her guards fell in around her, and the pocket of stillness closed, and I sat back down on my supply crate. The rest of day 12 was emergency operations and medical assessments, and the beginning of the very long official incident report process. And I was interviewed by 3 different teams: the station's emergency management office, the Valdris delegation's own incident team, and eventually, late in the evening, the Earth delegation's liaison officer, a career diplomat named Coordinator Harlow, who had a face like someone who had spent 30 years being surprised by things and had eventually made peace with the condition. Coordinator Harlow sat across from me in a small office in the Earth delegation quarters, and she looked at me for a moment, and then she said, "So you went through the fire." "There was a gap," I said. She looked at me. "At the bottom," I added. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You're aware that the Vorkalindra flame is," she paused, seemed to be choosing her words, "significant to the Valdris, culturally and spiritually." "I read that in the briefing materials," I said. "After. It's burned continuously for 2,000 years, she said. "Yes. It's out now. I know." She was quiet again, and then she said, very carefully, "The Empress was seen weeping in the emergency corridor." I nodded. "By approximately 30 people, she added, "including 4 members of other delegations." I wasn't sure what the relevant response to this was, so I just nodded again. Coordinator Harlow leaned back and rubbed the bridge of her nose. She was a woman who had spent 3 decades navigating interspecies diplomacy, and she had clearly encountered many things in that time. And she was currently encountering something that was giving her the specific expression of a person who is recalibrating. "You should probably know," she said finally, "that no one in recorded Valdris history in 700 years of the Empress's reign, and she's the longest-serving ruler they've had, no one has seen Thessaly Vorkalindra cry. In public." I thought about this. "She loves Myra very much," I said. Coordinator Harlow looked at me. "Yes," she said, "she does." The Vorkalindra flame was extinguished on day 12. On day 13, something happened that, according to everyone I've spoken to who knows Valdris history and culture, had never happened before. At 09:00 station time, a formal request came from the Valdris Empress's office to the station's Cultural Affairs Coordinator and to the Earth Delegation Liaison. The Empress requested the presence of Diven Osai Mensa at a private ceremony in the Valdris delegation quarters. The ceremony was for the relighting of the Vorkalindra flame. I want to be careful here, because I am aware that I am someone who has a very incomplete understanding of Valdris culture, and I do not want to describe something sacred in a way that flattens it or makes it smaller than it is. I'll tell you what I experienced, which is what I can speak to. The Valdris delegation quarters occupied a large section of Ring 2. I was escorted by 2 of the Imperial Guards, the same 2 who had been standing at the entrance to the maintenance corridor when the fire was spreading, the ones who I had walked past on my way out with Myra, and they walked me through a series of corridors that were nothing like the maintenance infrastructure of Ring 4. They were very quiet and they were very composed, and they walked slightly ahead of me, which felt less like escort and more like they were making a path. The ceremony room was a large open space that had been arranged with careful precision. The new containment ring, a backup system, flown in overnight from the Valdris diplomatic ship, stood at the center. It was smaller than the original, and the engineering team was clearly still calibrating, but it was functional. The room held approximately 20 people. Senior Valdris officials, the chief advisor, the inner circle. Myra Vorkessel, sitting to one side with her arm bandaged, looking slightly awed by the significance of the moment she was in. Sira Vorlethais, the Vor attendant, standing at her station with the expression of someone who had spent the night processing both professional failure and personal devotion, and was currently choosing the devotion. And the Empress. She was not in her diplomatic dress. This was different, something more formal in a different register, more ancient-looking, with the Vorkalindra symbol embroidered across the shoulder. It seemed less like a costume and more like an intention. She acknowledged me when I entered. A deliberate look, a slight inclination of her head, not a bow, something specific to their culture that I later learned was a mark of recognized status, not quite equal but acknowledged. Seen. The ceremony itself was in Valdris. I had a small translation chip that one of the Earth delegation staff had given me on the way over, the smallest available, just an audio translation through a nearly invisible earpiece. And so I caught fragments, not everything, but enough to understand the shape of it. It was about continuity, about what it means for something ancient to break and then be restarted, about the difference between the end of a thing and the ending of a thing. Sir Vorlethais spoke, and then 2 of the senior advisors spoke, and then Myra spoke briefly, and her voice was steady, I noticed, and then the Empress spoke. I'm not going to try to quote the Empress's words, because the translation chip was imperfect, and I don't want to render something sacred inaccurately. What I'll tell you is what I understood from the fragments I caught, combined with what Myra told me later in a conversation that I'll get to. The Empress spoke about the flame going out, about what it meant in their tradition when something that had burned for 2,000 years was extinguished. She acknowledged the grief of it. She did not minimize it or perform philosophical acceptance of it. She said that it was a loss, real and significant. And then she said something about what she had seen in the corridor. I caught some of this directly. The translation chip gave me phrases without calculation. Into the fire, a species that we have called small. And then they have been among us for 31 years, and we have called them primitive. We have called them durable. We have called them new. She paused. I watched a human being walk through fire for someone he did not know, without hesitation, without armor, without certainty of survival. Another pause. Perhaps we have been measuring them wrong. The flame was relit. Sira Vorlethais performed the technical elements of the lighting, while a cultural elder recited the traditional words of the rekindling. The new plasma caught in the containment ring and shifted through its cycle, blue, then gold, then blue-gold, and then settled into the familiar deep shifting burn. It was different from the original. 2,000 years of continuous burning creates something that a newly lit flame doesn't have yet. Everyone in the room knew this, and they watched it anyway, this new beginning of the old thing, and there was grief in it, and also something else. Something that was not quite hope and not quite relief, but lived in the same neighborhood. After the formal portion of the ceremony, in the quieter social time that followed, Valdris diplomats drinking warm liquid from carved cups, the atmosphere slightly different, slightly softer, Myra Vorkessel came to stand beside me. She was 18, and she had been through the previous 20 hours in a way that had clearly left a mark. She looked tired, but she also looked like someone who had thought very carefully about something and had decided to say it. "She doesn't cry," Myra said. In standard, her standard was very good, better than I would have expected. "The Empress. In all my life, I have never seen her cry. My grandmother knew her for over 400 years, and she told me she used to say that Thessaly has cried exactly 3 times that she ever witnessed. The death of her children, the end of the war, and once when she thought she was alone, for reasons my grandmother never asked about." I didn't say anything. I was listening. "Yesterday was the 4th time," Myra said. "That's what her chief advisor told me this morning. The 4th time in 700 years. She looked at me. "You went through fire for someone you didn't know," she said. "A person from a species that probably calls your planet small. You had no armor, no certainty. You just went." "There was a gap at the bottom," I said. She looked at me for a moment, and then she smiled, a Valdris smile, which was slightly different from a human one but covered the same territory, and she said, "I know, the gap was very small." "It was big enough," I said. She was quiet. "Yes," she said, "it was." The summit concluded on day 14. The New Frontier Compact was ratified, 43 signatures, Earth's among them. It was a significant moment for interstellar relations, and I am told it will be in history books. I loaded supplies onto the Earth delegation's transport ship. That was my job. I did my job. But something had changed that I couldn't quite name. Not in me exactly, though also in me, because you don't walk through fire without it leaving something behind, but in something larger. In the way that certain moments seed themselves into what comes after, slowly and then all at once. 3 weeks after the summit, the Earth delegation received a formal communication from the Valdris sovereignty. It was a document, long in traditional Valdris format. The official translation ran to 40 pages. The core of it, as summarized by the Earth Ministry of Interstellar Affairs, was this. The Valdris sovereignty was formally revising its diplomatic classification of Earth from Tier 3, developing interstellar civilization, to Tier 1, full peer status. It was, according to everyone who understood these things, unprecedented for a reclassification to happen so quickly. It had been 31 years. Most civilizations spent 200 or 300 years at Tier 3. The formal justification cited in the document included a phrase that Coordinator Harlow read to me over a calm call, with an expression on her face that I wish I could have photographed. The phrase was, "demonstrated capacity for instinctive valor in the absence of personal interest." She read it to me, and then she waited. "The gap at the bottom," I said. She looked at me through the screen. "Yes," she said. "I still have the jacket. What's left of it? It's in a box in my apartment, and I don't keep it because I think it's particularly important or because I have any illusions about my own significance in the story. I keep it because it's the physical evidence that it happened, that the 4 minutes were real, that the heat was real. I think about Myra sometimes. She's 20 now, I think, and she's continued in the diplomatic track. She sends me a message on the anniversary of the summit. She has done this for 6 months now, once a month, and the messages are usually brief, usually in Valdris with a standard translation included, and they are always some small observation about the world. Something she saw, something she found interesting. The way a young person shares things with someone who they feel has some particular connection to their being alive. I think about Sira Vorlethis, who spent a year and a half on the post-incident investigation team, and whose career survived because the hairline fracture in the tertiary coupling was genuinely undetectable by the standard diagnostic protocol, and who I understand has since spent considerable time advocating for updated diagnostic standards across interstellar containment equipment. I think about the Vorkalindra flame, burning again now in both the Imperial Palace on Valdris Prime and in a new traveling containment unit with a significantly upgraded engineering architecture. Its continuous count restarted at 0 after 2,000 years. And I think about the Empress sometimes. I have not seen her since the morning after the summit, when she said goodbye to the Earth delegation. She came herself, which was noted by everyone as unusual. She went through the line of delegates and spoke briefly to each one, and when she reached me, standing at the very end, still not quite part of the official delegation, still the logistics coordinator, she stopped. She looked at me the way she had looked at me in the corridor, directly, like she was reading something. She said, "The flame will burn for another 2,000 years." "I hope so," I said. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "When they write about this summit and they will Deven Osai Mensa, they will write about the compact, the ratification, the historical moment." I nodded. "They should also write about the gap at the bottom of the fire," she said. And then she moved on down the line. There's a thing I've thought about many times in the months since. The fact that she wept. Not the fire, not the rescue, not the diplomatic reclassification, that specific moment in the corridor, that crack in 700 years of composure. I think people sometimes interpret that as sentiment, gratitude, the ordinary human and apparently alien experience of relief when someone you love is safe. And it was that, of course it was that. But I think it was also something else, something that I'm not sure I have the words for, but I'll try. She was 712 years old. She had seen 31 years of humans in the galaxy. She had called them small. She had called them primitive. She had called them new. Not cruelly, I don't think, not with malice. Just with the comfortable certainty of someone who has seen many civilizations in their early stages and knows the pattern. And then she saw one of them walk into a fire. For someone he didn't know, without armor, without certainty, without hesitation. And something in that, the specific, unrepeatable, unplannable nature of that, broke something open in her that 700 years of diplomatic composure had kept carefully sealed. I think she wept partly for Myra, yes, and partly for the relief, but I think she also wept for something she hadn't expected to feel, a kind of recognition, the kind that comes when something challenges the categories you've been using without knowing you were using them. She had been measuring us wrong, and she knew it. And the knowing of it, after 700 years, after a lifetime of assumptions that felt like facts, I think that is a specific kind of emotion. The grief and the wonder of being surprised by something you thought you had figured out, of having the universe reach into your comfortable understanding and rearrange something quietly and permanently. I walked through a gap in a fire, and an Empress of 47 star systems wept in a maintenance corridor because the universe, it turns out, is still capable of being larger than the space you've made for it in your mind. There is a piece of Valdris art that was sent to the Earth Ministry of Interstellar Affairs approximately 2 months after the summit. It arrived as part of a diplomatic gift package from the Empress's office, one of those formal exchanges that happen between civilizations as a kind of structured acknowledgement of connection. The gift package contained several items. Most of them were significant and historical, and are now in the appropriate museums. One item was directed specifically to me. It was small enough to hold in my hand. A piece of Valdris carved crystal, the same crystalline organic material that the exhibition archway had been made from, which I found meaningful, shaped into a flame form. Perpetual, contained, burning without fuel, through some application of Valdris crystalline engineering that I don't fully understand. Blue gold, shifting. Inside the crystal, visible through the translucent medium, was a small void, a deliberate gap at the base of the flame. No note, just the object. I keep it on my desk now, next to the box with the jacket. I look at it sometimes when I'm working, and I remember that the gap was real, and the fire was real, and the 4 minutes were real. And I remember a 700-year-old woman weeping quietly in a corridor. because she had seen something that broke the limits of what she expected the universe to contain. I think about that a lot. I think the universe does that, surprises even the oldest things. I think that might be what it's for.